Sometimes the hardest choices we make aren't between right and wrong, they're between fear and compassion. In the winter of 1882, Crista Barrick faced that choice when 20 freezing Apache warriors appeared at her cabin door during a blizzard. She could have turned them away like any other settler would. Instead, she let them inside. When morning came, she stepped outside to find 100 more warriors standing in the snow, waiting in silence. Their war chief wanted answers. Why had she shown them mercy? What would you do if one simple act of kindness changed everything you thought you knew about survival and trust? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story moves you, make sure you're subscribed. Tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 months before that frozen morning, Crista Barrick stood in the doorway of her cabin, watching the first signs of autumn creep down from the high peaks. The aspens were beginning their slow turn from green to gold, and the air carried that particular crispness that meant winter wasn't far behind. She was 39 years old, though the mountain sun and hard work had etched lines around her eyes that made her look older. Her hands were strong and calloused, her back straight despite the weight of 3 years of solitary living. The cabin sat at 7,200 feet, tucked into a fold of the White Mountains where her father had built it 23 years ago. It was solid work. Thick pine logs chinked with clay and moss, a stone chimney that drew smoke clean, and a roof that had weathered 2 decades of heavy snows. Her father had chosen this spot carefully, far enough from the settlements to avoid their noise and judgment, close enough to a spring-fed creek that never ran dry even in the driest summers. Crista walked to the small corral where her mule, Gus, stood watching her with those patient, knowing eyes that mules have. He was getting old now, grey around his muzzle, but he was steady and sure-footed on the mountain trails. She'd raised him from a colt, and he knew her moods better than most people ever had. "Morning, old friend," she said, running her hand along his neck. He leaned into her touch, and she felt that familiar comfort that comes from the company of animals who ask nothing but care and kindness. The homestead wasn't large, 40 acres her father had claimed, and another 80 she'd inherited when he passed 4 years ago. Most of it was too steep or rocky for farming, but there were meadows where she could graze Gus and the few chickens she kept. She had a vegetable garden that produced well enough in the short growing season, and she knew where to find wild herbs and roots in the forest. Her father had taught her to read the land, to take what she needed without taking too much. Inside the cabin, everything was neat and orderly. A cast-iron stove sat against one wall, a narrow bed against another. There was a table her father had built, 2 chairs, and shelves lined with supplies, flour and cornmeal in sealed tins, dried beans, salt pork, coffee. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a collection of objects that told the story of her life, a tintype of her parents on their wedding day, a hawk feather she'd found as a child, and a hand-carved wooden box that held her father's personal effects. She hadn't opened that box in more than a year. Some days the grief felt too fresh, too raw, even after all this time. Her father, Samuel Barrick, had been different from other settlers. While they saw the Apache as enemies to be driven out or destroyed, he had seen them as people trying to survive on land that had been theirs for generations. He'd learned some of their language, respected their ways, and when he traded with them, he'd been fair, more than fair, according to the other homesteaders who thought he was a fool or worse. Crista remembered the arguments when she was young, the angry men who'd come to their cabin demanding to know why Samuel was consorting with savages. Her father had stood in that doorway, calm and unmovable as a mountain, and told them that any man who couldn't see the humanity in another wasn't much of a man at all. They'd left angry, and after that the Barrick family had been left largely alone, isolated by choice and by the community's suspicion. She'd married at 23, more to escape that isolation than out of any great love. Thomas Barrick, no relation despite the shared name, had seemed steady enough. He owned a freight business in the valley, made decent money, and treated her well enough in public. They'd lived in town for 3 years, before he died, in what everyone said was an accident with his wagon on a mountain road. Crista had grieved. But if she was honest with herself, there was relief mixed in with the sorrow. Their marriage had been distant, cool, like two people sharing a house but not a life. He'd spent long periods away on business, and when he was home, he'd been distracted, secretive almost. She told herself it was just his nature, that some men were like that. After he died, she'd sold his business and come back to her father's cabin. By then, Samuel had been gone 6 months, and the place had started to show neglect. She'd spent that first year just putting things right, repairing the roof, clearing the chimney, restocking supplies. The work had been good for her grief, giving her something to do with her hands while her heart slowly mended. Now, 3 years later, she'd built a life that suited her. She was alone but not lonely. The mountains were her companions, the seasons her calendar. She knew every trail within a day's walk, every creek and meadow, every stand of timber. In summer, she'd sometimes go a month without seeing another soul. In winter, it could be 3 months between trips to the settlement for supplies. The other homesteaders still kept their distance. She was Samuel Barrick's daughter, after all, and old suspicions died hard. There was one exception, a man named Vernon Pike, who had a place about 8 miles east. He was in his 60s, weathered and lean, with a pragmatic streak that Crista appreciated. He'd stop by once a month or so, just to check that she was managing, and she'd return the favor when she could. It was Vernon who'd brought the news in early September, riding up just as she was splitting firewood for the coming winter. "Trouble brewing," he'd said without preamble, dismounting stiffly. "Army's been moving through, asking about Apache movements. They say there's been raids, settlers killed down south." Crista had set down her axe and wiped sweat from her forehead. "You believe it?" Vernon had shrugged. "Don't know what to believe anymore. Used to be, you could tell the difference between defending yourself and making excuses to take what ain't yours. Lines seem blurrier now. They usually are," she'd said. He'd looked at her with those sharp old eyes. "Your daddy's views got him isolated. Just saying, might be wise to keep your head down for a while. There's folks who remember he was friendly with the Apache. Some might think the same about you. Let them think what they want. Stubbornness is a Barrick trait," Vernon had said, but there was no meanness in it. "Just be careful, Crista. Times are changing, and not for the better." After he'd left, she'd thought about his words while she finished her work. Times were always changing, and people always thought it was for the worse. But there was truth in what he'd said about her father's reputation. She knew she was watched with suspicion by some, seen as too sympathetic to the Indian problem that everyone talked about, but nobody seemed to understand. That evening, she'd lit a lamp and decided to go through her father's box. She wasn't sure why. Maybe Vernon's visit had stirred something, or maybe she was just ready to face what was inside. The box was simple pine, smooth from years of handling. Inside were the usual things: letters from her mother before she died, a pocket watch that no longer worked, a few coins from places her father had traveled in his youth. But at the bottom, wrapped in oiled cloth, she found something she'd forgotten, a leather-bound journal. She'd opened it carefully, the pages brittle with age. Her father's handwriting was precise and steady, the entries dating back to before she was born. Most were mundane: weather observations, notes about planting and harvest, thoughts about building the cabin. But as she read deeper, she found entries that made her pause. "Traded with White Horse's band today. They're hungry. Cavalry has been driving them off their usual hunting grounds. Gave them more than the furs were worth. It's only right. Learned a new word today, shash. It means bear." They laughed at my pronunciation, but appreciated the effort. The Apache have a saying: "The land doesn't belong to us. We belong to the land." Wish more white men understood that. Maybe then we wouldn't be so eager to claim what was never ours to take. Entry after entry showed a man trying to bridge two worlds, trying to see past the fear and hatred that kept people apart. Near the end of the journal, she found an entry that made her stop and read it twice. "Met a woman today named Nasha. She's sister to Whitehorse, the band's leader. She was teaching the children about the plants, which ones heal and which ones harm. Spent the afternoon learning from her. She has a way of seeing the world that makes sense. Everything connected, everything with purpose. She gave me a gift today, a peace pipe carved from red stone. Said it was for friendship that crosses all boundaries. I'll keep it safe. Perhaps someday Crista will understand why. Crista had set the journal down and looked up at the mantel. There, behind the hawk feather, she saw it. A pipe she'd noticed 1,000 times, but never really looked at. She stood and took it down, feeling its weight, running her fingers over the intricate carvings. This was the pipe her father had written about, a symbol of friendship between her father and the Apache. She'd wrapped it back in cloth and placed it prominently on the mantel where she could see it every day. It felt important somehow, like a promise her father had made that she was meant to keep. The weeks had passed, autumn deepening into the hard edge of early winter. She'd prepared as she always did, cutting wood, preserving what food she could, checking her supplies against the long months ahead. The first snows came in October, light dustings that melted by midday. By November, the snow stayed, building in layers, transforming the mountains into something both beautiful and dangerous. She thought often about her father's journal, about the woman named Nasha, and the friendship her father had valued enough to write about. She wondered what had happened to those people, whether they were still alive, still trying to survive in a world that seemed determined to erase them. And then, on a night when the temperature dropped below zero and the wind howled like something alive and hungry, they came to her door. The blizzard came without warning, the way mountain storms sometimes do. Crista had been outside securing Gus in his shelter when the wind shifted and the temperature plummeted. Within minutes, the world disappeared behind a curtain of white so thick she could barely see her own hands. She made it back to the cabin by following the guide rope she'd strung between the buildings, her face already numb from the cold. Inside, she built up the fire and settled in to wait it out. This was the way of winter in the high country. You prepared as best you could and then accepted what came. She had plenty of wood, plenty of food, and the cabin was tight against the wind. She'd be fine. The knock came just after dark. At first, she thought it was just the wind throwing something against the door. But then it came again, deliberate and urgent. Crista's hand went to the rifle she kept by the fireplace. In all her years alone, she'd never had visitors after dark in winter. Anyone with sense would be sheltered by now. She moved to the door, rifle ready. "Who's there?" No answer, just another knock, weaker this time. Every instinct told her not to open that door. But she thought of her father, of the journal entries, of the man who had seen people instead of threats. She took a breath and lifted the latch. The wind nearly tore the door from her hands. In the swirling snow, she saw figures, men, their faces dark and frostbitten, wrapped in blankets that were stiff with ice. One stood at the front, supporting another who could barely stand. Behind them, she could make out more shapes in the darkness. "Please," the man said in broken English. "Shelter! Cold!" Crista's mind raced. These were Apache warriors. That much was clear from their clothing and features. 20 of them at least, possibly more. They could kill her, take everything she had. But looking at the man in front of her, at the wounded warrior he was supporting, she saw only desperate human beings on the edge of death. She stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in, quickly." They filed in one by one, moving with the careful slowness of men at the limits of their endurance. The cabin that had seemed adequate for one person suddenly felt impossibly small. They arranged themselves around the walls, making room for the wounded in the center near the fire. The man who had knocked, younger than the others, perhaps in his 20s, looked at her with something like disbelief. "You help us?" "You're freezing," Crista said simply. She set the rifle against the wall, not close enough to be a threat, but not too far to reach if needed. "Let me see to the wounded." She moved among them with her medical supplies, clean cloth for bandages, whiskey for disinfecting, needle and thread for the worst wounds. The warriors watched her warily, but allowed her to work. The injured man had taken a bullet through his shoulder, the wound already infected and fevered. She cleaned it as best she could, knowing he needed more help than she could provide. As she worked, the young warrior who spoke English stayed close, translating when needed. His name, she learned, was Takoda. The others said little, their faces guarded, but their eyes followed her every movement. "Why cavalry chase you?" she asked as she bandaged the shoulder wound. Takoda's jaw tightened. "They say we attack settlers." "Is lie. How do you know?" He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper stiff with dried blood. He handed it to her, and she spread it carefully on the table. It was a military map, marked with routes and positions, dates and times. Her eyes scanned the notations, and her stomach tightened as she began to understand what she was seeing. The map showed planned movements, not Apache movements, but cavalry movements. Ambush positions marked with X's, routes labeled Intercept here and Force South, and in one corner, a note in neat handwriting, Engagement scheduled for peace talks. November 7th. Ensure no survivors to contradict official account. November 7th had been 5 days ago. They invited your people to peace talks, Crista said slowly, and then ambushed you. Takoda nodded, his face hard. We come to talk peace. They come to kill. Many died before we escape. She looked around at the men in her cabin, seeing them with new understanding. These weren't raiders or warriors on the attack. They were survivors of a massacre, fleeing for their lives. She brought out what she had, dried venison, cornbread, coffee. It wasn't enough for 20 men, but they divided it carefully among themselves, the wounded getting larger shares. They ate in silence, too tired and cold to do more than fill their bellies. As the night wore on, the warriors settled into an uneasy rest. Crista sat in her chair near the fire, her rifle across her lap. She didn't fear them exactly, but she wasn't foolish enough to let her guard down completely. Takoda remained awake, sitting near the wounded man. He caught her eye and spoke quietly. "Why you help us? Other settlers, they shoot first. My father taught me to see people, not enemies. Your father was wise man. He was." She paused, then added, "He knew your people. Traded with them, learned from them." Something shifted in Takoda's face, surprise, recognition. He stood and moved to where an older warrior slept against the wall. He spoke in Apache, urgent and low. The older man's eyes opened, alert immediately despite his exhaustion. The warrior looked at Crista with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. He spoke in Apache, the words flowing quickly. "He asks, what was your father's name?" Takoda translated. "Samuel Barrick." The old warrior stood slowly, his joints stiff from cold and age. He crossed to her and looked into her face as if searching for something. Then he spoke again, his voice carrying weight. "He says your father saved his village many winters ago, when snows came early and hunting was poor. Your father brought food, asked nothing in return." Crista felt something catch in her throat. She'd known her father had helped the Apache, but she'd never heard the full story. The old warrior pulled something from inside his shirt, a small leather pouch. From it, he drew a silver locket tarnished with age. He held it out to her. Crista took it with trembling hands. She opened the clasp and found 2 small photographs inside. One showed her father as a young man, perhaps in his 30s. The other showed a woman, Apache, with intelligent eyes and a gentle smile. "Who is she?" Crista whispered. "Her name was Nasha," Takoda said quietly. "She was sister to our chief. She taught healing, taught the children. When cavalry came, she stayed behind so others could escape. She was killed that day." The name from her father's journal. "The woman who had given him the peace pipe. Your father tried to warn the village," Takoda continued. "He rode through a storm to tell them cavalry was coming, but he arrived too late. Nasha and many others were already dead." Crista closed the locket and held it tight. She understood now why her father had become so reclusive. He hadn't just been grieving her mother's death. He'd been carrying the weight of failing to save people he'd cared about. Outside, the storm howled with renewed fury. Crista added wood to the fire and checked on the wounded man, whose fever seemed to have broken. Around her, the warriors rested, and she allowed herself to close her eyes for brief moments. She woke to grey dawn light, filtering through the window. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. The warriors were stirring, preparing to leave now that the weather had cleared. Crista moved to the door and opened it, needing air after the close confinement of the night. The cold hit her like a wall, but it was a clear, still cold now, without the killing wind. And then she saw them. The snow-covered meadow beyond her cabin was filled with horses and men. Warriors on horseback, at least 100 of them, arranged in loose ranks that extended into the tree line. They sat motionless, their breath and their horses' breath rising in clouds of white vapor. At the front, a man dismounted. He was older than the others, perhaps 50, with a face that looked carved from stone and eyes like black glass. His presence commanded attention without demanding it. This was Chenoa. Even without being told, Crista knew he was the leader. He walked forward through the snow, stopping 10 feet from her door. Behind her, she heard the warriors from inside the cabin emerging. Takoda among them. Chenoa looked at her cabin, at her, at the 20 men who had sheltered there. Then he spoke, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. Takoda translated, standing at Crista's shoulder. He asks why a white woman opens her door to Apache warriors in the night. Crista looked at Chenoa, at the 100 warriors behind him, at the 20 exhausted men she'd sheltered. She thought about her father's journal, about Nasha's photograph, about the bloody map that proved which side had truly broken faith. Tell him, she said clearly, that I helped because they needed help. Tell him that's what decent people do, Takoda translated. Chenoa's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those obsidian eyes. He spoke again, and Takoda translated, he asks what you want in return. Nothing. They can go in peace. Chenoa took several steps forward. He studied her face, and she met his gaze without flinching. He says you have your father's eyes, Takoda said quietly. He asks to see inside your home. It was a test, Crista realized. She stepped back and opened the door wider. He's welcome. Chenoa entered, the old warrior following behind. Chenoa's eyes moved over everything, the simple furniture, the stores of food, the rifle by the fire. Then his gaze stopped on the mantle, the peace pipe, the one Nasha had given her father. Chenoa moved closer and touched it gently, reverently. He spoke in Apache, his voice thick with emotion. He says this pipe belonged to his sister, Takoda translated quietly. He has not seen it in 15 years. My father kept it safe, Crista said. He wrote about her in his journal. Chenoa turned to look at her, and for the first time she saw something other than stone in his expression. There was grief there, old and deep. He spoke directly to her, and Takoda translated, "Why do you help us when your people want us dead?" Crista thought about her answer, knowing it mattered more than anything she'd ever said. "You're not my enemies," she said finally. "You're people trying to survive, same as me. My father taught me that the worst thing a person can do is look at another human being and see something less than human." "I won't do that." Chenoa listened, his face unreadable. Then he nodded once, a gesture that seemed to carry weight. He pulled something from his belt, a woven blanket folded small. He unfolded it and held it up. The pattern was intricate, geometric designs in red and black and white. He draped it over her shoulders. "This pattern marks you as family," Takoda explained. "As long as you carry it, our people will know you are protected." Chenoa placed his hand over his heart and bowed his head. Then he turned and walked out. The warriors began preparing to leave, but first several dismounted and began making repairs around her property, fixing fences, stacking wood, reinforcing Gus's shelter. It was payment for the shelter she'd provided. Within an hour they were mounted and ready. Chenoa raised his hand in farewell, and the entire group began moving north. Takoda remained behind briefly. "You helped my people. I will return to help you. This is our way." Before she could argue, he rode after the others, and Crista was alone again. She walked back inside and looked at her cabin, the place where 20 desperate men had found shelter, where a war chief had seen his dead sister's gift and recognized honor. She touched the locket in her pocket, felt the weight of the blanket on her shoulders. Everything had changed. One decision, one open door, had altered the course of her life in ways she couldn't yet see. But as she looked at the peace pipe on the mantel, she knew she'd made the only choice she could live with. 3 days passed before Takoda returned. Crista had spent that time in a strange state between worry and reflection, wondering if she'd done the right thing, wondering what consequences might follow. She kept the Apache blanket folded on her chair, running her fingers over its patterns when uncertainty crept in. She was hauling water from the creek when she heard the horse. Her hand went instinctively to the rifle she'd started carrying everywhere, but she relaxed when she saw Dakota emerge from the tree line. He looked tired but unharmed, and he wasn't alone. The old warrior Kuruk rode with him, along with a young man, perhaps 16, with watchful eyes. They dismounted, and Dakota approached. The people reached Canyon safely. Genoa sends thanks. I'm glad they made it. Crista set down the water buckets. You didn't have to come back. I give word. Apache keeps word. He gestured to his companions. You remember Kuruk, and this is Kohana. He learns English. The young one stepped forward, his pronunciation careful. Thank you for helping. You're welcome. Come inside. They settled around her table, and Crista noticed how different it felt from that desperate night. There was ease now, a tentative trust. Kuruk's eyes kept returning to the peace pipe on the mantel. Tell me about Nasha, Crista said as she poured coffee. My father's journal only had a few entries about her. Dakota translated for Kuruk, and the old warrior spoke at length, his voice soft with memory. He says Nasha was teacher. Dakota translated. She knew plants, which heal, which harm. She taught children to respect all living things. She believed different people could live together if they tried to understand each other. He paused as Kuruk continued. She was sister to Whitehorse, our chief. When your father came to trade, she convinced Whitehorse to trust him. What happened to Whitehorse? Dead, killed same day as Nasha. Cavalry said they were protecting settlers, but the people had done nothing wrong. Kuruk spoke again, pointing to the locket that Crista now wore around her neck. He asks if you know what photograph means. Dakota said. That my father knew your people, that he cared about them. Dakota shook his head. More than that. Among our people, when someone gives photograph, it means they trust you with their spirit. Nasha gave this to your father because she trusted him completely. He honored that trust even after death. The weight of it settled on Crista. Her father had carried the grief of Nasha's death for 15 years, alone, unable or unwilling to speak of it. He wrote that she gave him the peace pipe, Crista said. He wrote that it was for friendship that crosses all boundaries. Kuruk nodded when Dakota translated, then spoke with quiet intensity. He says your father understood something most white people don't. The pipe isn't just object, it's promise. When people smoke pipe together, they agree to speak truth, to see each other clearly. Your father made that promise. Now you carry it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking coffee. Young Kahana watched everything with sharp eyes, occasionally asking Dakota to translate a word he didn't know. Finally, Dakota spoke again. Why your people hate us so much? We want only to live on land that was always ours. Fear, Crista said slowly, and greed. People fear what they don't understand, and they want what they don't have. Some men see valuable land and decide they deserve it more than the people who were here first. But not your father. No, not my father. And not me, Kuruk spoke, and Dakota translated. He says silence is choice too. When people see wrong and say nothing, they choose the side of wrong. The truth of it stung. How many times had Crista stayed silent when she heard settlers talking about the Indian problem? You're right, she said quietly. I should have spoken up before. I was afraid of being more isolated than I already was. Fear makes sense, Dakota said. But so does courage. You showed courage when you opened door. Maybe now you show courage with words too. Before Crista could respond, Kahana stiffened, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. He said something sharp in Apache, and immediately Dakota and Kuruk were on their feet. Rider coming, Dakota said. Crista looked out and saw Vernon Pike's grey mare approaching. It's my neighbor. He's friendly. But you should stay inside, out of sight. The 3 Apache men moved away from the window, and Crista stepped outside. Vernon dismounted, his weathered face creased with concern. Crista, thank God you're all right. Why wouldn't I be? There's been talk in the settlement. Cavalry came through 2 days ago, asking about Apache movements. They said there might be warriors in the area. He looked at the fresh tracks in the snow. Looks like you've had visitors. Just some travelers who needed help during the storm. Vernon's eyes narrowed. What kind of travelers? Crista made a decision. The kind who were running from an ambush. The kind who were invited to peace talks and then betrayed. Crista, I have proof, Vernon. A military map showing planned ambush positions. Vernon removed his hat and ran a hand through his grey hair. Even if that's true, you can't get involved in this. It's not safe. I'm already involved. The cavalry is looking for Apache warriors. If they find out you sheltered them, then they'll know I did the right thing. Vernon looked at her with something between admiration and frustration. You're as stubborn as your father. He was ostracized for being right when everyone else was wrong. I can live with that. Can you live with being arrested? Or worse? Vernon's voice dropped. There are men in the settlement who think the only good Indian is a dead one. If they think you're sympathizing with the enemy, they're not the enemy. They're people trying to survive. Vernon put his hat back on. I came to warn you. Keep your head down. Don't give anyone a reason to cause you trouble. I appreciate the warning. Your father was a good man, Crista. But being right didn't protect him from being alone. Think about that. He mounted his horse and rode away. Crista stood in the cold, understanding his concern. But she also knew that silence had its own cost. She went back inside. Takoda and the others had heard everything. Your friend worries for you, Takoda said. He's right to worry. But that doesn't change what's right and wrong. Kuruk spoke, and Takoda smiled as he translated. He says you have warrior spirit. He says Nasha would be proud. The words touched something deep in Krista's chest. To hear that she was honoring Nasha, a woman she'd never met, but whose spirit seemed woven through her father's life, meant more than she could say. They stayed for another hour. Kahana practiced his English, asking her to name objects and repeating the words. Kuruk told stories about Nasha, how she'd walked 3 days to bring medicine to a sick child, how she'd believed that peace was always possible if people were willing to see each other's humanity. As they prepared to leave, Kuruk approached the mantel and touched the peace pipe one more time. He spoke to Crista, his eyes serious. He says the pipe should be used, Takoda translated, not just kept. When the time comes to speak truth, to bring people together, you should use it. That's what Nasha intended. I don't know how to use it properly. You will know when time comes. They rode away as afternoon shadows lengthened. Crista watched them disappear into the forest, then went back inside. She stood at the mantel looking at the peace pipe. She tried to imagine her father sitting with Nasha, sharing smoke and stories, building a bridge between worlds. Could she do the same? That night, she opened the journal again and found the entry she'd remembered. True bravery isn't charging into battle or facing down enemies. It's protecting others when you're afraid. It's standing up for what's right when staying silent would be easier. It's opening your door when every instinct says to bolt it shut. Nasha taught me that. She said the bravest thing a person can do is choose love over fear, again and again, even when love costs everything. Crista closed the journal and looked around her cabin at the peace pipe, the blanket, the locket, all the physical reminders of a legacy she'd inherited. But the real inheritance wasn't these objects. It was the choice they represented. Her father had chosen to see people instead of enemies. Nasha had chosen to trust when experience said she shouldn't. Now Crista had to choose whether to hide in safety or step forward in truth. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. She would stand for what was right no matter the cost. She would honor her father's memory and Nasha's trust. She would be the bridge her father had tried to be. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Winter was settling in hard, and the months ahead would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But she was ready. She wasn't her father, and she wasn't Nasha. But she was Crista Barrick, and she would write her own chapter in this story of courage and connection. The peace pipe sat on the mantel, waiting. The time would come to use it. She banked the fire and lay down to sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions. But tonight, wrapped in the Apache blanket with her father's locket against her heart, Crista Barrick felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. She felt purpose. 4 days after Chenoa and his people left, Takoda returned with news that changed everything. Crista was splitting wood when she heard the approach of horses, 3 riders moving carefully through the forest. She recognized Takoda immediately, and with him came Kuruk and a younger warrior she hadn't met before. They dismounted, and Takoda's face was grave. "We have problem." "Big problem." Crista set down her axe. "Come inside." Around her table, Takoda spread out several pieces of paper, wanted posters, freshly printed, still crisp. Krista's stomach turned as she read them. There were drawings of Apache warriors, crude but recognizable. Chenoa's face dominated the largest poster. The charges listed were extensive: murder, arson, theft, assault on federal troops. "These are lies," she said. Looking up at Takoda, "Yes, but settlers believe lies." He pointed to the dates listed. "Says we attacked 3 different places. But on these days we were far away. I was at trading post with Kuruk. White men saw us there." Crista examined the dates more carefully. One stood out immediately. "This date, November 9th, it says you attacked a ranch near Silver Creek." "Yes, we were nowhere near Silver Creek." "I know. Because on November 9th, I saw Apache warriors at the trading post in Pine Bend. I was there buying supplies." She looked at Takoda. "I can testify to that. I can prove these charges are false." Takoda shook his head slowly. "Your word against army? Against powerful men? They will not listen. Maybe not. But I have to try." The young warrior who had come with them spoke for the first time, his English halting but clear. "They want our land. This is true reason." "What do you mean?" Crista asked. Takoda pulled out another paper, a hand-drawn map showing the canyon where Chenoa's people were sheltering. "Man in town makes this map. He sells to mining company. They want land for silver." "How do you know this?" "We capture Scout. He tells us before he escapes. Says mining company pays cavalry to remove us. Says they pay men to lie about attacks. Make people afraid so they want us gone." Crista sat back, the full picture becoming clear. This wasn't about justice or safety. This was about greed. Someone wanted the Apache gone so they could claim land that wasn't theirs, and they were willing to manufacture evidence to do it. "Who's behind this?" "What mining company?" "He says man named Gaines." "Cornelius Gaines. Silver Mountain Mining." Crista knew the name. Cornelius Gaines was one of the wealthiest men in the territory, with interests in mining, timber, and land speculation. "He had the money and connections to make something like this happen. This is bigger than I thought," she said quietly. "Yes, very big." Takoda met her eyes. "This is why I tell you, you should not be involved. This is dangerous for you. I'm already involved. And if I can help prove the truth, truth does not matter when men have power and money." Kuruk spoke through Takoda's translation. "He says he has seen this before. Men with power do what they want. Then we make the truth matter," Crista said firmly. "We gather evidence. We find witnesses. We force people to see what's really happening." The young warrior spoke again, and Takoda translated with what might have been admiration. "He says you are brave. Foolish but brave. Despite the gravity of the situation." Crista smiled. "I've been called worse." They spent the next hour discussing strategy. Crista would document everything she knew, including her presence at the trading post on the dates in question. She would try to find other witnesses who had seen the Apache warriors far from the locations where attacks supposedly occurred. Meanwhile, Takoda and his companions would continue gathering intelligence about the cavalry's movements. As they prepared to leave, Kuruk approached her and spoke at length in Apache. His tone was serious, almost formal. Takoda translated carefully. "He says you remind him of Nasha, not in appearance but in spirit. He says Nasha also believed truth was stronger than lies, that one person with courage could change things. He says Nasha died believing that. He hopes you will not." The words hit Crista hard. "Tell him I'll be careful." "But tell him I won't stop trying." Kuruk nodded, then did something unexpected. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a small object wrapped in soft leather. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a woven band, the kind worn around the wrist. The pattern matched the blanket Chenoa had given her. He handed it to Crista and spoke. He says this belonged to Nasha, Takoda translated. He carried it since she died to remember her. He wants you to have it now. He says it will protect you, as Nasha's spirit protects all who fight for truth. Crista took the band with trembling hands. The weaving was exquisite, the colors still vibrant after 15 years. She tied it around her wrist, feeling the weight of the gift, the trust it represented. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. "I'll honor her memory. I promise." After they left, Crista sat at her table and began writing. She documented everything, the dates she'd seen Apache warriors at the trading post, the blood-stained map showing the planned ambush, the wanted posters with their fabricated charges. She wrote about Nasha and her father's friendship with the Apache people. She didn't know if any of it would matter, but she had to try. 2 days later, Vernon Pike arrived with more troubling news. He dismounted heavily, his face drawn with worry. "There's been a town meeting," he said without preamble. "They're organizing a militia, calling for volunteers to help the cavalry hunt down the Apache warriors. Based on lies," Crista said, "based on fear. True or not, people believe settlers are in danger. Gaines has been spreading stories, offering money to families who claim they were attacked. Someone has to speak up. Someone has to tell the truth." Vernon looked at her sharply. "You speak up in that town, and you'll be lucky if they only run you out. So I should just stay quiet. Let innocent people be hunted down and killed. I'm saying you can't fight this alone. Gaines has money, influence, and a lot of angry, frightened people on his side. What do you have?" "The truth. The truth," Vernon said bitterly. "Never saved anyone who didn't have the power to back it up." They stood in silence for a moment, both knowing he was probably right but unwilling to accept it. Finally, Vernon spoke again, his voice softer. "I know what you're thinking. I know what your father would have done. But Samuel paid a price for his principles. He died alone and isolated. Is that what you want? My father died knowing he'd done right. That's more than most people can say." Vernon shook his head. "You're going to do what you're going to do. Just promise me you'll be smart about it. Don't go charging into town making accusations. I promise I'll be careful." "That's not the same as being smart, but I suppose it'll have to do." Vernon mounted his horse. "If you need help, real help, you come find me." After he left, Crista stood in her doorway, looking out at the mountains. Somewhere out there, Chenoa and his people were trying to survive, while armed men hunted them based on lies. And here she was, one woman with no power, nothing but a few pieces of paper and a promise to a dead woman she'd never met. It should have felt hopeless. But as she touched the woven band on her wrist and thought about Nasha, about a woman who had believed one person could make a difference, Crista felt something, else determination. She went back inside and continued writing. She would document everything, gather every piece of evidence, and when the time was right, she would speak. Maybe no one would listen. Maybe Vernon was right, and the truth didn't matter when power and money were arrayed against it, but she would speak anyway, because silence was its own kind of lie. That night, she opened her father's journal again and found an entry she'd missed before. "I don't know if anything I've done has mattered. I tried to build bridges, tried to show people that the Apache are human beings, deserving of respect. Most folks think I'm a fool. Maybe they're right. But then I remember Nasha, remember what she taught me, that we don't do the right thing because we'll win. We do it because it's right. Win or lose, that choice defines who we are. I hope Crista understands that someday." Crista closed the journal and wiped her eyes. Her father had understood exactly what she was facing now. He'd made his choice knowing the cost, and he'd never regretted it. She wouldn't regret hers either. She looked at the peace pipe on the mantel, at Nasha's woven band on her wrist, at the locket containing photographs of people who had tried to bridge impossible divides. These weren't just objects. They were a legacy, a responsibility, and a promise. She would honor that promise, whatever it cost. Outside, the wind carried the scent of snow. Winter was deepening, and with it the danger. The cavalry would intensify their hunt. The lies would spread, but somewhere in those mountains, Chenoa's people were counting on her, not because she was powerful or important, but because she'd opened her door when she could have kept it closed, because she'd chosen to see their humanity. That choice had changed everything. There was no going back now. Crista Barrick had stepped across a line, and on this side of it there was only forward. Toward truth. Toward justice. Toward whatever consequences came from refusing to stay silent. She would not let them down. A week passed with no word from Takoda. Crista spent the time preparing, not just documenting evidence, but readying herself for what might come. She organized her father's journal entries, made copies of the blood-stained cavalry map, and wrote detailed accounts of everything she'd witnessed. She kept these papers hidden in a metal box, buried beneath the floorboards, insurance against anyone who might come looking. The isolation she'd once found comforting now felt oppressive. Every sound made her reach for her rifle. Every shadow beyond the window could be cavalry scouts, or worse, the militia Vernon had mentioned. She caught herself checking the tree line constantly, wondering if the next rider would bring help or danger. On the 8th day, as grey dawn broke over the mountains, Takoda appeared with Chenoa himself. Krista's heart jumped at the sight of the war chief dismounting in her yard. This was no casual visit. She stepped outside, and Chenoa approached with the formal bearing she'd seen that first morning. He spoke and Takoda translated. He says, "Time for talking is ending. Time for action comes soon. What's happened?" "Cavalry finds our canyon. They watch it now, wait for more soldiers before they attack. We have maybe 3 days, maybe 4. Takoda's face was grim. "Genoa comes to release you from any obligation. He says you have done much already. What comes next is dangerous. You should not be part of it." Crista looked at Chenoa, seeing the weight he carried, responsibility for dozens of families, children, elders. "What are you planning?" Takoda translated the exchange as Chenoa spoke. "We must move families to safety before attack comes. There is Pueblo to the north, 2 days' travel. The people there will give sanctuary, but cavalry patrols make the route dangerous. You need a guide, someone who knows the land and won't be shot on sight." Chenoa's eyes narrowed slightly, studying her. "I know these mountains," Crista continued. "I know trails the cavalry doesn't. My father showed me paths through terrain where horses can barely pass, but where people on foot can travel unseen." "This is not your fight," Takoda said. Though his tone suggested he was arguing more from duty than conviction, it became my fight the moment I opened my door. Crista met Chenoa's gaze. "Your people need help. I can provide it. That's all that matters." Chenoa spoke at length, his voice measured and serious. "He says if you do this, there is no going back." Takoda translated carefully. "The cavalry will know you helped us. Your people will call you traitor. You will lose everything, your home, your place in their world. He asks if you understand this." "I understand." "He asks why you would sacrifice so much for people you barely know." Crista thought about her answer, knowing it needed to be true and complete. "My father spent his life trying to bridge the divide between our peoples. He failed, mostly because too few were willing to help him. I won't make that same mistake." And, she paused, touching Nasha's woven band on her wrist, "because someone very wise once believed that one person with courage could change things. I'd like to honor that belief," Takoda translated, and something shifted in Chenoa's expression. He stepped forward and placed his hand over his heart, then extended it toward her, a gesture of respect, of acceptance. He spoke again, and Takoda's voice carried a new weight. "He says you are no longer just friend to his people. You are family. What threatens you threatens all of us. What protects you protects all of us. Tell him I'm honored, and tell him we don't have time to waste. If we only have 3 or 4 days, we need to plan carefully." They went inside, and Crista spread out her hand-drawn maps of the region. She'd spent years exploring these mountains, and she knew routes even the old trappers had forgotten. Her father had taught her to read the land, to find the paths that didn't show up on any official map. "Here," she said, tracing a line with her finger. "This ravine runs north for almost 10 miles. It's narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people walking side by side, but it's hidden by rock walls and heavy timber. The cavalry wouldn't see it unless they knew exactly where to look." Chenoa studied the map, then spoke to Takoda in Apache. He asked about water along this route. Takoda translated. 2 springs here and here, both reliable even in winter. And there's shelter, overhangs and caves where people could rest out of the weather. They spent 2 hours planning. The families would move in groups of 10, with warriors protecting each group. Crista would lead the first group to show them the way, then return for the second. It would take 2 days to move everyone. Assuming the cavalry didn't discover what was happening, what about the warriors who stay behind? Crista asked. Someone has to hold the canyon, make it look like everyone's still there. Volunteers will stay, Dakota said. Make fires, move around, create shadows. Give families time to escape. That's a death sentence. The cavalry will attack in force. We know this. Dakota's voice was calm, accepting. This is our way. The strong protect the weak. Warriors protect families. Crista felt the weight of it, men choosing almost certain death so their children might live. How many will stay? 20, maybe 25. Enough to make cavalry believe we all still there. And after the families are safe, what happens to those warriors? Genoa spoke, and Dakota translated with careful precision. He says there are other ways out of the canyon, paths only we know. The warriors will fight long enough, then escape through these paths. Some will die, some will survive. This is the way of war. There has to be another option. Something that doesn't require. There is no other option, Dakota said firmly. This is reality of our situation. We are hunted. We are outnumbered. We do what we must to save our families. The stark truth of it silenced Crista. These people were making impossible choices because all the possible ones had been taken away by lies, greed, and hatred. Then we make sure the families get to safety, she said quietly. We make sure their sacrifice means something. Genoa nodded, satisfied. He spoke again, pulling something from his belt, a brass compass, old and worn, with an inscription on the back. He handed it to Crista, and she read the engraving. Truth over fear. Her breath caught. This was my father's. I thought it was lost when he died. Dakota translated Genoa's words. He says your father gave this to Nasha many years ago. She carried it always. When she died, Kuruk took it, kept it safe. Now Genoa gives it to you. He says you will need it to find the way, not just through mountains, but through what comes after. Crista held the compass with trembling hands. This was the one her father had written about, the one he'd used to navigate not just terrain, but moral choices. And now it was hers, returned after all these years, when she needed it most. Tell him thank you. Tell him, her voice broke slightly, tell him I'll use it the way my father would have wanted. Genoa placed his hand on her shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that transcended language and culture. Then he and Dakota prepared to leave. We move families tomorrow at dawn, Dakota said. Be ready. Bring only what you can carry. This journey will be hard. I'll be ready. After they left, Crista stood in her cabin, looking at everything she'd built over 3 years of solitary living. This place had been her refuge, her sanctuary. Tomorrow she would leave it, possibly forever, to guide strangers through dangerous territory. She packed carefully, warm clothes, food, medical supplies, ammunition. She left most of her possessions behind. They were just things, and things didn't matter when lives hung in the balance. She opened the compass and watched the needle settle, pointing true north. Her father had carried this compass through his own journey of conscience. Nasha had carried it as a reminder that some people were worth trusting. Now it was Krista's turn to carry it forward. That night she barely slept. She kept thinking about the warriors who would stay behind, about the children who would walk through freezing ravines toward uncertain safety, about Genoa's burden of deciding who lived and who might die. Just before dawn, she stood at her window and watched the eastern sky lighten. Somewhere out there, families were preparing to flee their homes. Warriors were preparing to sacrifice themselves. And she was preparing to cross a line from which there was no return. She touched the compass in her pocket, felt Nasha's band on her wrist, pressed her hand against the locket at her throat. These weren't just keepsakes anymore. They were anchors, reminders of why this mattered. Her father had written, "True bravery is protecting others when you're afraid." She was afraid, but she was also ready. When Dakota arrived with the first group of families just after dawn, Crista Barrick was standing in her doorway with a pack on her back and her father's compass in her hand. ready to lead them toward whatever came next. The first group consisted of 12 people, 3 mothers, 6 children ranging from 4 to 12 years old, 2 elderly women, and 1 old man whose hands shook with age, but whose eyes remained sharp. Takoda and 2 young warriors accompanied them as protection. The children were silent, understanding without being told that noise could mean death. Crista led them away from her cabin toward the hidden ravine, using her father's compass to navigate through terrain that looked impassable to the untrained eye. The children struggled in the deep snow, and the mothers took turns carrying the youngest ones. Progress was painfully slow. By midday, they'd covered only 3 miles. At this rate, the journey would take 3 days instead of 2. Crista called a halt near one of the springs she'd marked on her map. "We need to rest," she said to Takoda. "The children are exhausted." He nodded, but his eyes kept scanning the surrounding ridges. "Cavalry patrols come through here sometimes. We cannot stay long." While the families rested and drank from the spring, Crista noticed one of the children watching her, a girl of about 7 with solemn dark eyes. After a moment, the girl approached and held out something, a small doll made from corn husks. Crista recognized her. This was Chenoa's daughter, the child she'd seen briefly before. "Hello," Crista said softly. The girl spoke in Apache, her voice barely above a whisper. Takoda translated. "She asks if you are scared?" "Yes," Crista answered honestly. "Are you?" The girl nodded. "What's her name?" Crista asked. "Casa. It means fur robe. She was born in winter, wrapped in furs to stay warm." "That's a beautiful name." Crista knelt to the girl's level. "Your father is a brave man, Casa." The girl spoke again, and Takoda's translation came softer. "She says her father told her you are brave too. She says he told her you are family now." Something in Krista's chest tightened. She looked at this child, displaced, hunted, facing a dangerous journey into an uncertain future, and saw not an enemy or a problem, but simply a little girl who deserved safety and peace. "I'll do everything I can to keep you safe," Crista promised. "All of you." Casa reached out and touched Nasha's woven band on Krista's wrist. She spoke, and Takoda translated with surprise in his voice. "She says that band belonged to her grandmother. She never met Nasha, but her father told her stories. She says you must be special if you carry her grandmother's protection." Crista felt the weight of generations pressing down. Nasha to Samuel to herself, now to this child who represented the future. "Your grandmother was a wise and good woman. I hope to honor her memory." They resumed the journey, but now Casa walked near Crista, occasionally reaching up to hold her hand when the terrain was difficult. The simple trust of it was both humbling and terrifying. If she failed, if she led them wrong or into danger, this child and all the others would pay the price. The afternoon wore on, and the ravine narrowed further. Here, the rock walls rose 50 feet on either side, and the path was barely wide enough for single-file walking. Snow had drifted in places, making passage treacherous. One of the elderly women stumbled and would have fallen if Takoda hadn't caught her. She spoke to him in Apache, her voice weak. "She cannot go much farther today," Takoda said. "None of them can." "We must find shelter." Crista remembered a cave her father had shown her years ago, a place where he'd once waited out a 3-day storm. "There's an overhang about a mile ahead, deep enough to shelter us all with room for a small fire." They pushed on, and as twilight gathered, they reached the overhang. It was as Crista remembered, a natural shelter carved by ancient water, with a flat floor and a ceiling high enough to stand. The opening faced away from the wind, and there was wood nearby for fire. The warriors gathered wood, while the women settled the children. Crista helped where she could, sharing out her supplies, dried meat, hardtack, a little coffee. It wasn't much, but divided among 12 people, it would keep them fed for the night. As darkness fell and the fire cast dancing shadows on the rock walls, the group huddled close for warmth. One of the mothers began singing softly in Apache, a lullaby that needed no translation. The children's eyes grew heavy, and one by one they drifted to sleep. Casa nestled against Crista, and without thinking, Crista put her arm around the child. She felt small and fragile, like a bird, She trusts you, Takoda said quietly, settling nearby. Children know who is safe. I hope I deserve that trust. You do. You have proven this already. He paused. Tomorrow will be harder. The pass narrows even more, and there is a stretch where we will be exposed on the ridge. If cavalry patrols see us, then we travel at night through that section, Crista said. It's more dangerous in the dark, but less dangerous than being spotted. Takoda considered this. You know this land well. My father taught me. He said knowing the land was the difference between surviving and dying in the high country. She looked at the sleeping children. He also taught me that land doesn't belong to anyone. We just pass through like water through a canyon. The land remains. This is Apache teaching also, Takoda said. Your father understood our ways. He tried to. I wish he could see this, see us working together. Perhaps he does. The dead watch over those they loved. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the fire crackle and the wind moan through the ravine. Finally, Takoda spoke again. You asked before about the warriors who stay behind. I'm supposed to return tomorrow to join them. Crista looked at him sharply. You're one of the volunteers? I am young, strong, skilled with weapons. It makes sense for me to fight while others guide families to safety. It makes sense for you to survive. You speak English. You can bridge the two worlds. That's valuable. Many things are valuable. My life is not more valuable than Chenoa's daughter reaching safety. He said it simply, as fact rather than heroism. Takoda, you don't have to. Yes, I do. This is my choice. My honor. He looked at her seriously. You understand this, I think. You also make choice that puts you in danger. You also sacrifice safety for what is right. She couldn't argue with that. They were both making impossible choices because the alternative, doing nothing, was worse. Will you... She hesitated. Will you tell me about Nasha? Before you go back. Takoda smiled slightly. She was my grandmother, my mother's mother. I was small when she died, but I remember her laugh. She laughed often, even in hard times. She said laughter was a medicine that cost nothing. She sounds wonderful. She was. She taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but action despite fear. She taught me that one person standing for truth is worth more than 100 people staying silent. He touched Krista's arm where Nasha's band was tied. She would have liked you very much. Crista felt tears threaten and blinked them back. I wish I could have known her. You do know her. You carry her spirit. You honor her teaching. Takoda stood and moved to take his watch position. Sleep now. Tomorrow is long journey. Crista tried to sleep, but her mind wouldn't settle. She thought about Takoda returning to almost certain death, about Chenoa choosing which warriors would stay and which would live, about Casa sleeping trustingly against her side. She thought about her father writing in his journal about courage and choice. She thought about Nasha laughing in hard times, teaching that one person could make a difference. And she thought about the cavalry closing in, about Cornelius Gaines counting money earned from lies and theft, about a system so broken that it hunted children through winter mountains because powerful men wanted land they had no right to claim. Anger kindled in her chest, not hot and explosive, but cold and determined. This wasn't just about saving these 12 people. It was about standing against injustice, about refusing to let cruelty win, simply because it was backed by power. Her father had fought this fight and died isolated. Nasha had fought it and been killed. Now it was Krista's turn, and she would see it through. She pulled out the compass and opened it, watching the needle point steady and true. Truth over fear, the inscription read. She'd been afraid when she opened her door to 20 freezing warriors. She'd been afraid when she promised to guide families through dangerous terrain. She was afraid now, thinking about what tomorrow might bring, but fear wouldn't stop her. Nothing would stop her. She closed the compass and tucked it safely away. Then she wrapped her arm more securely around Casa and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, they would continue north, towards safety and uncertain future. But tonight, in this shelter carved by ancient waters, they were alive and together and still fighting. That was enough. They moved through darkness the next night, crossing the exposed ridge under a moonless sky. The children were exhausted but brave, and by dawn they'd reached the relative safety of the northern forest. Krista's feet were numb, her hands raw from steadying people on icy rock, but they'd made it. One more day would bring them to the pueblo. Takoda left at first light to return to the canyon. Before he went, he clasped Krista's hand. "You have done well. The families will reach safety because of you. Come back alive, Takoda. Please, I will try. But if I do not, tell Kesa her family fought with honor. Tell her the stories. I will. I promise." She watched him disappear into the forest, then turned back to her charges. The mothers were already preparing for the day's travel, their movements efficient despite exhaustion. Kesa stood close to Krista, holding the corn-husk doll. "Is Takoda your friend?" The girl asked in careful English. "Yes, a good friend. Will he die?" The directness of children never ceased to humble Krista. "I hope not. But he's doing something very brave to keep you safe. My father is brave too, the bravest man I've ever met." They pressed on, following game trails through old-growth timber. The going was easier here, the forest providing shelter from wind and concealment from any patrols. By afternoon, Krista began to recognize landmarks. They were close now, perhaps 3 hours from the pueblo. Then she heard horses. Instantly, she signaled the group to silence and concealment. They melted into the underbrush as hoofbeats approached. Krista positioned herself where she could see the trail, her rifle ready. 3 cavalry scouts emerged, riding slowly, studying the ground. They were tracking, looking for signs of passage. Krista held her breath, praying the children would remain silent. The scouts stopped directly in front of their hiding place. One dismounted, examining the snow. "Something came through here recently," he said. "Could be elk, could be people, could be Indians," another said. "We should report this." The third scout, an officer by his markings, shook his head. "First we make sure." "Spread out, search the area." Krista's finger moved to the trigger. If they found the families, she'd have seconds to act. She could drop 1, maybe 2, before the third got off a shot. But that shot would bring more cavalry, and then a sound froze her thoughts. One of the younger children, a boy of maybe 5, sneezed. The scout's head snapped toward the sound. The officer drew his pistol. "Come out! We know you're there!" Krista made a split-second decision. She stood, leaving her rifle behind, stepping into view with her hands raised. "Don't shoot. I'm alone." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Barrick? What in God's name are you doing out here?" She recognized him then, Lieutenant Warren, a young officer she'd met once in town. He was barely 25, still carrying himself with the rigid certainty of inexperience. "Hunting," she lied. "Elk tracks led me this far north." "Hunting?" His skepticism was obvious. "Where's your gear?" "Your horse?" "Lost my horse 2 days back." Startled by something and bolted. "I've been walking back." Warren studied her, clearly not believing a word. "Search the area," he ordered his men. "There's nothing to find," Krista said quickly. "I'm telling you I'm alone," but the scouts were already moving into the brush. It would take them seconds to find the families. Krista's mind raced, trying to think of anything. Then one scout called out, "Lieutenant!" "Found something!" Warren moved toward the voice, and Krista's heart stopped. But the scout emerged, holding not a person, but a leather satchel. Her satchel, the one she'd been carrying. It must have fallen when she'd hidden. The scout opened it and pulled out papers. Krista's blood went cold. Those were her documents, the copies of the cavalry map, her written testimony about the wanted posters, everything. Warren took the papers and began reading. His expression shifted from suspicion to shock to something harder. "These are military documents." "How did you get these?" "I found them." "You found a classified tactical map?" "Do you think I'm stupid?" He read further, and his face darkened. "This is seditious material. You're claiming the U.S. Army committed murder?" "I'm claiming someone planned an ambush of people who came for peace talks. The dates and locations are right there. These are lies. Apache propaganda." But something in his voice wavered slightly. "Look at the handwriting. That's a military officer's notation. Ensure no survivors to contradict official account. Does that sound like justice to you?" Warren's jaw tightened. "Even if this were real, which I'm not saying it is, it wouldn't matter. Orders are orders. The Apache are hostile, and they will be removed. They're not hostile. They're desperate, and they're being hunted because someone wants their land for mining. That's enough. Warren's hand moved to his pistol. You're under arrest for aiding enemy combatants and possession of stolen military documents. I'm trying to prevent murder. You're committing treason. The other scouts had returned, and one spoke quietly to Warren. Sir, we found tracks. Multiple people, including children. Trail leads north. Warren's eyes locked on Crista. Where are they? Where are the Apache you're hiding? I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. You're guiding them, aren't you? Helping them escape. He grabbed her arm roughly. How many? Where are they going? Crista stayed silent, and Warren's face flushed with anger. Miller, Thompson, follow those tracks. I want to know where they lead. As the scouts mounted and rode north, Crista felt desperation rising. They'd find the families within an hour. Everything she'd done, all the risk, would be for nothing. Then Miller, one of the scouts, called back. Lieutenant, there's something else you should see. He rode back holding another document, this one newer, official-looking. He handed it to Warren, found it in her satchel. It's a letter addressed to Captain Marcus Reeves. Warren unfolded it and began reading. Crista watched his face change, confusion, then disbelief, then something like recognition. He looked up at her, and his voice was strange. This letter mentions Thomas Barrick. Your husband? Crista's stomach dropped. She'd forgotten about that letter. The one Takoda had shown her, the one they'd taken from the cavalry scout, the one that proved her husband had been involved in the conspiracy. Your husband was an informant, Warren said slowly, reading. He provided information about Apache movements to mining interests. He was paid. Warren's voice caught. He was paid by Cornelius Gaines. I didn't know, Crista said quietly. Not until after he died. The letter says he was killed because he developed a conscience, because he threatened to expose the operation. Warren looked at her with something between pity and suspicion. Did you know your husband was murdered? Not until recently. I thought it was an accident, Warren read further, and his expression grew darker. This letter is addressed to Captain Reeves. That's my commanding officer. He looked up. It describes payments, arrangements, planned operations. If this is authentic, it is. We took it from a cavalry scout who tried to stop us. Then my commanding officer is part of a conspiracy to murder civilians for profit. Warren's voice was hollow, the certainty draining from his face. The man I report to, the man who gives me orders, is taking money to hunt innocent people, Crista finished.
I'm sorry.
But that's the truth. Warren stood very still, the papers shaking slightly in his hands. The other scout, Thompson, watched nervously. Sir, what do we do? It was the question that defined everything. Warren was young, idealistic, raised to believe the army represented honor and justice. Now he held proof that honor was for sale and justice was a lie. I don't know, he said finally. I don't... He stopped, looking at Crista. How many families are you protecting? She made a choice. 12 people. 6 of them children. They're heading to the Pueblo for sanctuary. And you believe they're innocent? I know they are. I can prove they were nowhere near the places they're accused of attacking. I was there. I saw them. Warren looked at the documents again, then at his men, then back at Crista. Some internal war was being fought behind his eyes. Finally he spoke. Thompson, give me your word you'll never speak of what happened here. Thompson nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Warren turned to Crista. You have 4 hours head start. After that, I have to report finding these tracks. What I choose to report about you, he paused. I'll decide later. You're letting us go? I'm following my conscience, Mrs. Barrick, something your husband should have done sooner. He handed back her satchel. These documents, they're evidence of crimes. Real crimes. I don't know what I'm going to do with them yet. But I won't let children die for Cornelius Gaines's profit. Thank you, Lieutenant. Don't thank me. Just get those families to safety. And Mrs. Barrick? His voice hardened slightly. If I find out you lied to me, if those people have done anything to harm settlers, I'll hunt you down myself. Understood? Understood. Warren and his scouts rode away, heading south rather than north. Crista stood trembling, hardly believing what had just happened. She'd been seconds from disaster, and somehow she remembered the words in her father's journal. Sometimes the hardest thing is trusting that good people exist on all sides. Warren was a good person confronted with ugly truth, and he'd chosen conscience over orders. Crista hurried back to where the families hid. They emerged cautiously, the mothers clutching their children. "We have to move now," Crista said. "Fast as we can. We have maybe 3 hours before more soldiers come." They ran as much as exhausted people could run, pushing through the last miles toward safety. Casa held Crista's hand, trusting even though she must have been terrified. As the pueblo came into view, adobe buildings clustered around a central plaza, smoke rising from cooking fires. Crista felt something break inside her chest. They'd made it, against all odds. Through danger and betrayal and the weight of impossible choices, they'd made it. The Pueblo people came out to meet them, offering water and food and shelter. Casa's mother wept with relief, holding her daughter close, and Crista stood watching, thinking about her husband's betrayal, about Lieutenant Warren's courage, about all the ways people could choose honor or profit, truth or lies. Her husband had chosen wrong and paid with his life. Warren had chosen right and risked his career. Now she knew the full depth of what she was fighting, not just false accusations and mining greed, but a rot that ran through the institutions, meant to protect people. The fight was bigger than she'd imagined, but she was still fighting. She touched the compass in her pocket. Truth over fear, always. The Pueblo elders welcomed the Apache families with quiet dignity, offering shelter in adobe rooms warmed by corner fireplaces. Crista watched as the children were given food and blankets, as the mothers finally allowed themselves to weep with relief, as the elderly were tended with herbs and gentle hands. An old Pueblo woman named Awenasa approached Crista, her weathered face kind. "You brought them through the mountains?" "Yes, alone. With help. Good people who risked everything." Awenasa studied her for a long moment. "You are the white woman they spoke of. The one who opened her door. I just did what anyone should have done, but most do not." Awenasa gestured toward the central plaza. "Come, you need food and rest. Then we talk." Over a meal of corn stew and warm bread, Crista learned that the Pueblo had been expecting them. Chenoa had sent a messenger 3 days earlier, asking for sanctuary. The Pueblo people, having suffered their own betrayals at the hands of the government, had agreed immediately. "How many more come?" Awenasa asked. "At least 30 more people, maybe 40. They're traveling in smaller groups behind this one." Crista paused. "There are warriors, 20 or more, who stayed behind to hold the canyon, to make the cavalry think everyone was still there." Awenasa's face grew sad. "Brave men. They sacrifice much, too much." Crista felt the weight of it pressing down. "I have to go back. I have to help the other groups reach safety. You are exhausted. You will die if you return now without rest. People will die if I don't go back." Casa appeared at Crista's elbow, the cornhusk doll clutched in her small hands. She spoke in Apache, and Awenasa translated. "She asks if you are leaving. She asks if you will come back." Crista knelt to the child's level. "I have to go help more people. But I promise I'll come back." "I promise." Casa reached out and pressed the cornhusk doll into Crista's hands. She spoke again, and Awenasa's voice softened as she translated. She says, "Take this. It will keep you safe like you kept her safe. She says when you come back, she will make you a new one." Crista's eyes stung. "Tell her I'll treasure this. Tell her I'll be very careful so I can come back and see the new one." After a few hours of rest, nowhere near enough but all she could spare, Crista prepared to leave. She'd replenished her supplies from the Pueblo's stores, taken fresh water, and received detailed information about where the other groups were expected to be. As she was checking her rifle, a runner arrived from the south, breathing hard. He spoke rapidly in Apache to Awenasa, who translated for Crista. He says, "The cavalry attacked the canyon this morning. Many soldiers, many guns. The warriors fought bravely, but..." Awenasa paused, her face grave. "He says most of the warriors fell, Only 5 escaped through the hidden paths. Crista felt the ground shift beneath her. "Dakota, is he—" The runner spoke again, and Awanasa shook her head. "He does not know. The 5 who escaped are traveling north now, but slowly. They are wounded." "Where?" "Where are they?" "Near the old mining camp, perhaps 2 hours south of here." Crista didn't hesitate. "I'm going to them. The cavalry will be searching. I don't care. Those men saved dozens of lives. I won't leave them to die alone." She set out immediately, moving fast through terrain she now knew well. The afternoon sun was lowering when she found them. 5 warriors, 3 badly wounded, making their way slowly through heavy timber. One of them was Dakota. His shoulder was bloodied, and he moved with a limp, but he was alive. When he saw her, something like relief crossed his face. "You should not be here," he said. But there was no strength behind the words. "Neither should you. But here we are." She moved to examine his wounds. The shoulder was a bullet graze, painful but not fatal. His leg was worse, a deep gash that had bled heavily. "We need to stop this bleeding." She worked quickly with the medical supplies she carried, cleaning and bandaging the wounds. The other warriors were in similar condition, battered but alive. One had taken a bullet through his side and was feverish. Another had burns on his hands from handling hot rifle barrels during the prolonged fight. "What happened?" she asked as she worked. Dakota spoke between gritted teeth as she tied off a bandage. "We held them for 5 hours, made them believe all the people were still there. When they finally attacked in force, we fought from the rocks, made every bullet count. Then when we could do no more, we escaped through the back paths." "The others?" His face went hard. "Dead, all dead. They died so families could live. This is how it should be." The matter-of-fact acceptance of it broke something in Crista. These men had chosen death so children like Casa could reach safety. They died holding a canyon against overwhelming force, buying time with their lives. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry this is the choice you had to make." "Do not be sorry. Be angry. Be angry that we live in a world where such choices are necessary." Dakota looked at her with fierce intensity. "Promise me. Promise you will tell what happened here. Tell how men died defending families from lies and greed. Tell so their deaths mean something. I promise." "I swear it." They helped the wounded warriors toward the pueblo, moving slowly. Darkness was falling when they saw horsemen ahead. For a terrible moment, Crista thought it was cavalry. But then she recognized the lead rider, Vernon Pike, with 3 other men from the settlement. He dismounted quickly, his face a mixture of relief and worry. "Thank God. I've been searching for you for 2 days. How did you know where to look?" "Lieutenant Warren came to me, told me what happened, told me you were guiding Apache families north. He said if anyone knew where you'd be, it would be me." Vernon looked at the wounded warriors. "These men need help. We're taking them to the pueblo." "Then let us help." Vernon turned to his companions, homesteaders Crista recognized, decent men who'd always been fair in their dealings. "Get these men on horses. We'll move faster that way." As they worked, Vernon spoke quietly to Crista. "Warren told me about the letter. About your husband. I'm sorry, Crista. I had no idea. Neither did I, not until it was too late to matter. It matters now. Warren's planning to take those documents to the territorial governor. He's risking everything to expose what's happening. Gaines will destroy him. He has too much money, too many connections. Maybe. But Warren says he can't live with himself if he stays silent. Says you showed him what real courage looks like." Vernon paused. "He's not the only one. Word's spreading about what you've done. Some people, not many, but some, are starting to ask questions about these so-called Apache raids. It won't be enough. Gaines controls the narrative. Then we change the narrative. We make people see the truth." They reached the pueblo as full darkness settled. The wounded warriors were taken to be tended, and Crista finally allowed herself to collapse into the rest her body desperately needed. But she woke before dawn to find Chenoa standing in the doorway of her room. The war chief looked older than when she'd last seen him, grief and exhaustion written in every line of his face. He spoke in Apache, and Awanasa, who had appeared to translate, conveyed his words. "He says you have done more than anyone could ask. You have saved his daughter, his people. He says, "You have honored your father's memory and Nasha's trust." Awanasa paused. He says the debt can never be repaid, but he will try for all his remaining days. "There is no debt," Crista said. "We did what was right." Chenoa spoke again, longer this time, his voice carrying weight. He says the cavalry will not stop, Awanasa translated. They will come here eventually. They will try to take his people again. He says he is tired of running, tired of watching his people die. He says, she paused, choosing words carefully, he says it is time to fight differently, not with bullets, but with truth. He asks if you will help him. How? Chenoa pulled out a leather bundle and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was the peace pipe, the one that had belonged to Nasha, the one that had sat on Crista's mantle. He must have taken it before they fled the canyon. He held it out to Crista and spoke. He says this pipe was meant to bring people together, to make them speak truth across all divides, Awanasa translated. He says now is the time to use it. He wants to call a council, Apache, Pueblo people, settlers who will listen, even soldiers like Lieutenant Warren. He wants everyone to hear the truth, to see the evidence, to face what has been done in their names. They'll arrest him the moment he shows his face in a settlement. Yes, this is why it takes courage. Chenoa spoke again, and Awanasa continued. He says his warriors died buying time with their blood. Now he will buy justice with his freedom if necessary. He will go to the settlement, will speak truth publicly, will demand that people choose between lies and honor. Crista understood what he was proposing, something far more dangerous than guiding families through mountains. He wanted to walk into the lion's den and demand accountability. He would almost certainly be arrested, possibly killed. You'll need witnesses, she said slowly. People who can testify to the truth. Yes, this is why he asks for your help. You have proof, the maps, the letters, your testimony. With these things and his testimony, perhaps some will listen. Perhaps. Or perhaps we'll both be arrested for treason. Chenoa smiled slightly, and Awanasa translated. He says you have already committed treason in their eyes by helping his people. He says all that remains is to make that treason count for something. Crista looked at the peace pipe in Chenoa's hands, thought about Nasha who had given it to her father, thought about all the deaths and sacrifices that had brought them to this moment. She thought about Case's corn-husk doll, about Takoda's wounds, about the 20 warriors who would never see their families again. Vernon was right. It was time to change the narrative. When? She asked. 3 days. That gives time for word to spread, for people to gather. Lieutenant Warren will be there. Your friend Vernon? Others who want truth, Chenoa paused. And Cornelius Gaines. He will come because he will want to see us arrested. But he will hear truth instead. It's risky. Everything could go wrong. Everything is already wrong. Now we try to make it right. Chenoa extended the pipe toward her. Will you stand with me? Will you help me use this pipe as Nasha intended, to speak truth that crosses all boundaries? Crista took the pipe, feeling its familiar weight, its promise of bridge building across impossible divides. Her father had carried this. Nasha had given it with trust. Now it was asking her to put everything on the line one more time. She thought about her father's compass, about the inscription, "Truth over fear." She thought about Nasha teaching that one person with courage could change things. She thought about all the people who had risked and lost everything to protect the innocent. Yes, she said, I'll stand with you. We'll speak truth together, and whatever happens after, we'll face it together. Chenoa nodded, satisfied. He spoke one more time, and Awanasa's translation carried the weight of prophecy. He says, 3 days from now, the world will hear what was done in darkness. 3 days from now, people will have to choose what they believe and who they are. He says, Awanasa smiled slightly. He says, may the spirits give us courage, and may the truth set us all free. Crista looked at the peace pipe in her hands, at Chenoa's determined face, at the coming dawn beyond the window. 3 days. 3 days to prepare for the most important moment of her life. 3 days until truth faced power, and they discovered which was stronger. She closed her hands around the pipe and felt its promise settle into her bones. Whatever came next, she would face it standing tall. The 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Vernon spread word through the settlements that there would be a council, a public hearing of grievances and evidence. Lieutenant Warren, risking court-martial, used his authority to ensure military presence would be observational rather than hostile. The Pueblo people prepared a neutral space, a clearing between their land and the nearest settlement, where all could gather safely. Crista spent those days organizing evidence and testimony. She copied documents, prepared statements, and rehearsed what she would say. But more importantly, she listened to the stories of the Apache families, their accounts of broken treaties, stolen land, and manufactured accusations. Each story was a thread in a larger tapestry of injustice, and she committed them all to memory. On the morning of the council, Crista woke before dawn and prepared with deliberate care. She dressed simply, but with intention, her father's compass in her pocket, Nasha's woven band on her wrist, the locket around her neck. She carried the peace pipe wrapped in soft leather, its weight a constant reminder of what this day meant. Chenoa arrived with Takoda and Kuruk, along with several other Apache who had survived. They were unarmed, a gesture of peace that made them vulnerable but sent a clear message. Vernon came with a dozen settlers, men and women, who had agreed to hear the truth. Whatever it might be, Lieutenant Warren appeared in uniform, accompanied by 2 other junior officers who, he explained quietly to Crista, had also grown suspicious of their orders. They would serve as official witnesses to whatever was said. And then, as the sun climbed toward midday, Cornelius Gaines arrived. He came in a fine carriage with armed guards, dressed in expensive clothes that spoke of wealth and power. He was a tall man in his 50s, with silver hair and cold eyes that assessed everything like a ledger sheet. Behind him came Captain Reeves, Warren's commanding officer, looking uncomfortable but determined. Gaines surveyed the gathering with barely concealed contempt. "What is this circus?" "A council," Chenoa said through Takoda's translation. "A speaking of truth. The only truth is that you're a murderer and a thief, and you should be in chains." Gaines turned to Captain Reeves. "Arrest him." "Arrest all of them." "Not yet," Reeves said carefully. "We're here to listen first. Lieutenant Warren has made serious allegations. They deserve to be heard. Allegations from a boy who doesn't understand how the world works." But Gaines remained, confident that whatever happened, his money and influence would prevail. The gathering formed a circle, perhaps 60 people in all, Apache, Pueblo residents, settlers, soldiers. In the center, Crista stood with Chenoa, the peace pipe between them. Vernon stepped forward to address the crowd. "We're here today because too many questions have gone unanswered. Too many accusations have been accepted without proof. Today we hear evidence. Today we speak truth. And today, everyone here will have to decide what they believe." Crista unwrapped the peace pipe and held it up for all to see. This pipe belonged to a woman named Nasha. She was an Apache healer and teacher. She gave this pipe to my father 20 years ago as a symbol of friendship across all boundaries. She believed that when people smoked this pipe together, they agreed to speak truth and see each other clearly. Today, we honor that belief. She lit the pipe with steady hands, took a breath of smoke and passed it to Chenoa. He did the same, then passed it to Kuruk. The pipe moved around the circle. Not everyone participated, but enough did that the gesture held meaning. When the pipe returned to Crista, she set it carefully on a cloth in the center of the circle. Then she began, 3 weeks ago, 20 Apache warriors came to my door during a blizzard. I let them in because they were freezing to death. That decision changed my life and revealed truths that many people don't want to hear. She pulled out the blood-stained cavalry map and held it high. This map shows planned ambush positions. It was carried by Apache warriors who were invited to peace talks on November 7th. Look at the notation here. Ensure no survivors to contradict official account. This wasn't law enforcement. This was murder. Gaines laughed dismissively. That map could be a forgery. Apache propaganda. Then explain this. Crista pulled out the wanted posters. These posters claim Apache warriors attacked specific locations on specific dates. But I was at the trading post in Pine Bend on November 9th. I saw Apache warriors there, the same warriors accused of attacking a ranch 50 miles away on that same date. They couldn't have been in both places. The testimony of one woman against official reports. Gaines shook his head. Hardly convincing. Then let me add my testimony, Vernon said, stepping forward. I was also at that trading post. I saw the same warriors. Mrs. Barrick is telling the truth. One of the other settlers spoke up. A woman Crista recognized from town. I saw Apache warriors trading peacefully in Silver Creek on November 12th. That's another date they're accused of attacking settlers. Another voice joined in, then another. People who had seen the Apache warriors far from the locations they were accused of attacking. People who had witnessed peaceful interactions that contradicted the official narrative of violence and hostility. Gaines's face was reddening. This is absurd. These people are telling the truth, Lieutenant Warren interrupted. He stepped forward holding a leather portfolio. And I have evidence that supports everything they're saying. He opened the portfolio and pulled out papers, official documents, military correspondence, financial records. These documents show payments from Silver Mountain Mining Company to various military personnel. They show planned operations to remove Apache from land that contains valuable mineral deposits. They show, he looked directly at Captain Reeves, they show who has been taking bribes. Reeves went pale. Lieutenant, you're making a serious mistake. The only mistake was following orders I should have questioned from the beginning. Warren's voice was steady despite the fact that he was ending his career. These documents prove that the campaign against the Apache has nothing to do with protecting settlers. It's about clearing land for mining interests. And people have died because of it. Lies, Gaines spat. All lies? Where did you get these supposed documents? From your own courier, Warren said calmly. He was quite talkative when faced with evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. The crowd was murmuring now, the energy shifting. People were looking at Gaines with new eyes, seeing past the fine clothes and confident manner to something uglier beneath. Chenoa spoke, and Takoda translated his words for all to hear. My people have lived on this land for generations beyond counting. We have watched as promises were broken, as treaties were torn up, as our children were hunted for crimes they did not commit. We have watched as men like this one, he pointed at Gaines, decided our lives were worth less than the silver in our mountains. He paused, his voice carrying across the silent gathering. We did not start this war. We have only tried to survive it. And now we ask, what will you do? Will you continue to believe lies because they are comfortable? Or will you face the truth even though it is hard? The question hung in the air, challenging everyone present to choose. Gaines stood abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. Captain Reeves, you will arrest these people immediately, or I'll see you court-martialed. You'll see no one court-martialed, a new voice said. Everyone turned. A man in formal dress rode into the clearing, flanked by 2 federal marshals. He dismounted and approached the circle with authority. I am Judge Aldrich Hayes, appointed by the territorial governor. I've been investigating allegations of corruption and conspiracy in this region. He looked at Gaines with cold eyes. Mr. Gaines, you're under arrest for bribery, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. The moment stretched, crystalline and perfect. Gaines's face went from red to white, his confidence crumbling as the marshals moved toward him. You can't do this, Gaines said, his voice losing its power. I have rights. So did the people you tried to have killed, Hayes said. Take him. As the marshals led Gaines away, Crista felt something release in her chest. It wasn't over. There would be trials, testimony, more fighting. But this moment, this victory, was real. The crowd erupted in conversation as Gaines was led away, some shocked, others angry, still others nodding as if pieces had finally fallen into place. Judge Hayes raised his hand for silence. There's more to address here today, he said. Captain Reeves, step forward. Reeves moved like a man walking to his execution. His face was ashen, his earlier confidence completely gone. Hayes pulled out more documents from his satchel. I have evidence that you accepted payments totaling $3,000 from Silver Mountain Mining Company over the past 2 years. You used your authority to orchestrate attacks on peaceful Apache, falsified reports, and ordered your men to commit acts that violated both military law and basic human decency. I was following orders, Reeves said weakly. Whose orders? Gaines isn't military. You chose to take his money and betray your oath. Hayes turned to the gathered soldiers. Anyone else who participated in this conspiracy should come forward now. Cooperation will be taken into account. 2 soldiers stepped forward hesitantly, admitting they'd been paid to file false reports. A third confessed to planting evidence at supposed attack sites. As each confession came, the scope of the conspiracy became clearer. It wasn't just 1 or 2 corrupt men, but a systematic campaign of lies and violence orchestrated for profit. Lieutenant Warren stood straight despite the revelations, his integrity intact. Sir, I have more evidence if you need it. Names, dates, specific orders that contradicted established protocols. I'll need all of it, Lieutenant. You've done good work here, difficult work. That takes courage. Warren glanced at Crista. I learned from someone who showed me what real courage looks like. Hayes turned his attention to Chenoa. Chief Chenoa, you and your people have suffered grave injustices. The territorial government will investigate all claims and work toward restitution. But first, I need your testimony. Detailed accounts of everything that was done to your people, Takoda translated, and Chenoa responded at length. He says his people will testify, Takoda said. But testimony is not enough. His people need land where they can live in peace without fear of being driven away again. They need protection under law, not just promises that will be broken. That will require negotiations with the federal government, Hayes said carefully. I can't promise immediate solutions, but I can promise that what happened here will be documented, prosecuted, and used to prevent future abuses. Promises have been broken before, Chenoa said through Takoda. Why should we believe these promises are different? It was Crista who answered. She stepped forward, the peace pipe still resting on the cloth between them, because this time there are witnesses. This time, everything is documented. This time people are watching. She looked around at the gathered crowd, settlers who had heard the truth, soldiers who had seen the evidence, Pueblo people who had offered sanctuary. This time, you're not alone. Chenoa met her eyes and something passed between them, recognition, respect, hope, tempered by hard experience. He spoke again, and Takoda translated. He says if Mrs. Barrick stands as witness, if she continues to speak truth even after today, then perhaps these promises have a chance. He says she has proven herself when others would have stayed silent. I'll stand witness, Crista said firmly. For as long as it takes, I'll testify in every court, tell this story to everyone who will listen. What was done here was wrong, and I won't let it be forgotten or swept aside. Vernon stepped forward. Neither will I. I'll testify to what I've seen and heard, one by one. Others in the crowd added their voices, settlers who had witnessed the truth, soldiers who were tired of following corrupt orders, Pueblo people who had given sanctuary and would continue to do so. Judge Hayes watched this unfold with something like satisfaction. Then we have a foundation. Truth, witnesses, and the will to see justice done. He turned to Captain Reeves. You're under arrest. You'll be tried in a military court for corruption and conspiracy. As marshals took Reeves into custody, Hayes addressed the crowd one final time. What happened here today is significant, but it's only the beginning. Real change takes time, effort, and constant vigilance. The corruption we've exposed today didn't happen overnight, and rooting it out completely won't happen overnight either. But days like today, when people choose truth over comfort, justice over profit, these are the days that change the course of history. The formal proceedings concluded, and the crowd began to disperse. Some settlers approached Chenoa cautiously, offering apologies or simply acknowledgement. Some soldiers looked ashamed, others relieved. The Pueblo people invited everyone to share a meal, a gesture of peace and new beginnings. Crista found herself standing with Chenoa, Takoda, and Kuruk. The 4 of them watching as people who had been enemies an hour ago now talked cautiously but honestly. "Do you think it will last?" Dakota asked. "This peace we built today? I don't know," Crista admitted. "But we gave it a chance. We spoke truth when we could have stayed silent." "That matters," Genoa spoke, and Dakota translated with a slight smile. "He says Nasha would be proud. She always believed that speaking truth, even when it's hard, even when it seems hopeless, is how change begins." He says she was right. Crista picked up the peace pipe and held it carefully. "This pipe has been used for its true purpose today. It brought people together to speak honestly." "That's what Nasha wanted. What will you do now?" Dakota asked. It was a question Crista had been avoiding. Her cabin was far away, possibly damaged or claimed by others. Her reputation in the settlements was forever changed. Some would see her as a hero, others as a traitor. Her old life was gone, transformed by the choices she'd made. "I'll stay," she said slowly, "here or nearby. Wherever I'm needed to keep speaking truth and making sure promises are kept. This isn't finished. There will be trials, negotiations, people trying to undermine what we've started. Someone needs to watch, to witness, to remember." "You sacrifice much," Kuruk said through Dakota's translation. "So did your warriors. So did Nasha. So did my father. I'm just continuing what they started." She looked at the three men who had become friends, allies, family. "Besides, I'm not sacrificing anything that matters. I'm choosing what matters most." Genoa placed his hand over his heart and extended it toward her, the gesture of respect and family she'd seen him make before. Then he said something in Apache, his voice formal and carrying weight. Dakota's translation came with emotion. He says, "You are no longer just friend or ally. You are sister. You are family in the deepest sense. His people are your people. His home is your home. And when his daughter tells her children about this time, she will tell them about the white woman who opened her door when everyone else closed theirs, who stood for truth when lying was safer, who became sister to people who were supposed to be enemies." Crista felt tears on her cheeks, but didn't wipe them away. "Tell him I'm honored. Tell him," her voice caught, "tell him I'll keep speaking truth as long as I have breath. For Nasha, for my father, for all the warriors who died defending their families, and for every child like Cassie who deserves to grow up in a world where truth matters more than power." The translation was made, and Genoa nodded. Then he smiled, a real smile, the first Crista had seen from him, and spoke again. He says, "Tomorrow we begin the hard work of building that world. But today we celebrate what we've won. Today truth defeated lies. Today courage defeated fear. Today is a good day." As the sun lowered toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the gathering, Crista looked at the peace pipe in her hands and thought about all the hands that had held it before hers. Nasha, her father, Genoa, each had used it to bridge divides, to speak truth, to build connections across impossible barriers. Now it was her turn to carry that legacy forward, not with grand gestures or heroic acts, but with steady, daily courage. With truth told again and again until people listened. With bridges built one conversation at a time. The fight wasn't over. But today they'd won something worth celebrating. Today, truth had prevailed. 3 months later, as spring began to soften the mountain snow, Crista stood in the doorway of her cabin, not the old one she'd left behind, but a new one built near the pueblo with help from Apache. Pueblo and settler hands working together. It was smaller than the first, but warmer somehow, built with the labor of people who had become family. The trials had concluded 2 weeks earlier. Cornelius Gaines was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. Captain Reeves received 10 years and a dishonorable discharge. 3 other soldiers received lesser sentences in exchange for their testimony. The territorial governor had issued a formal apology to Genoa's people and established a commission to investigate land claims and treaty violations. It wasn't perfect justice. No punishment could restore the warriors who had died or erase the years of persecution. But it was more than most people had dared hope for, and it established precedent that might prevent future abuses. Crista had testified in every trial, her testimony carrying weight because of her background as a settler, her documented evidence, and her unwavering consistency. The newspapers had called her various things: hero, traitor, idealist, troublemaker. She didn't care much about any of those labels. She'd simply told the truth again and again, until people had no choice but to listen. Lieutenant Warren had been promoted to captain, assigned to oversee implementation of new protocols designed to prevent the kind of corruption that had flourished under Reeves. He visited monthly, bringing news from the settlements and requesting Crista's advice on matters involving the Apache communities. Vernon Pike had become an unexpected ally in building bridges between settlers and Apache. His practical, no-nonsense approach appealed to both groups, and he'd helped negotiate several agreements about shared resources and mutual protection. He stopped by Crista's cabin now, riding up with his usual unhurried pace. "Thought you'd want to know," he said as he dismounted. "The mining company's pulling out of the canyon. Without gains, they don't have the influence to push through their claims. The land will remain Apache territory. That's good news, better than good. It's a miracle, if you ask me." Vernon studied her cabin, the garden she'd started planting, the corral where Gus stood contentedly. "You settling in all right?" "Better than all right. This place feels like home in a way the old cabin never quite did. That's because you built it with friends, instead of just inheriting it." Vernon paused. "Your father would be proud of you, Crista. You finished what he started. I think what he started will never be finished. But maybe that's the point. Maybe building bridges is work that every generation has to do." Vernon nodded thoughtfully, then rode away with a promise to return for the gathering planned for next week, a celebration of spring and new beginnings that would bring together Apache, Pueblo, and settler families. After he left, Crista went inside and opened the wooden box that held her most precious possessions. Her father's journal, now filled with her own entries continuing his story. The blood-stained cavalry map that had been entered as evidence in the trials. The wanted posters that had been proven false. And the silver locket with photographs of her father and Nasha. Two people who had tried to see past divisions to shared humanity. She added a new item to the collection, a letter from the territorial governor, officially recognizing her role in exposing the corruption and thanking her for her courage. She didn't care much about official recognition, but the letter represented something larger, acknowledgement that what had been done in darkness was now in the light. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Kesa standing there, holding not one, but two cornhusk dolls. The girl had grown in the past 3 months, her face less haunted, her eyes brighter. "I made one for you," Kesa said in careful English, her pronunciation much improved. "Like I promised." Crista knelt and accepted the doll with appropriate ceremony. "It's beautiful." "Thank you, Kesa. I made 2, see? One for you and one for me. So we match. So we're connected no matter where we are." "Yes." Kesa smiled. "Adedi. Father says you're family now. Really family, not just words. Your father is right. We are family." Behind Kesa, Chenoa appeared with Takoda, who still walked with a slight limp, but had healed remarkably well. They'd come to invite her to dinner, a weekly tradition that had developed over the months. As they walked together toward the Pueblo, Crista felt the rightness of it, this strange, unexpected family she'd built from courage and crisis. They talked easily now, mixing Apache, English, and hand gestures when words failed. Kesa held Crista's hand, chattering about the garden she was helping her mother plant. During dinner, as they shared food and stories around a communal fire, Owinasa presented Crista with a gift, a new journal, leather-bound and beautiful. "For your stories," the old woman said. "So others will know what happened here. So they will understand that change is possible when people choose courage over fear." Crista accepted it with gratitude, and that night, by lamplight in her cabin, she opened the journal and wrote the first entry. She wrote about the blizzard night when 20 warriors had appeared at her door. She wrote about her father's legacy and Nasha's wisdom. She wrote about the warriors who had sacrificed everything, about Chenoa's courage in speaking truth to power, About Case's innocence preserved through terrible circumstances. She wrote about how sometimes the hardest choices aren't between right and wrong, but between fear and compassion, and how choosing compassion again and again can change the world. The next morning, she woke to find Takoda waiting outside with 2 horses. "Genoa wants to show you something," he said. They rode for an hour into the mountains, following trails that wound through pine forest and across meadows beginning to show the first green of spring. Finally, they reached a high ridge overlooking the canyon where the Apache families had once sheltered, where warriors had died buying time with their blood. Genoa was there, along with Kuruk and several others. They'd erected markers, simple stone cairns with symbols carved into the rocks. 20 cairns, one for each warrior who had fallen. Genoa spoke and Takoda translated. He says this is a place of remembering, a place where we come to honor those who gave everything so others could live. He says you should be here because you helped give their sacrifice meaning. Crista walked among the cairns, reading the symbols, understanding that each represented a life, a person, a story cut short. She found tears on her cheeks but didn't wipe them away. These men deserved tears. They deserved to be remembered. At the edge of the memorial, there was one more cairn, different from the others. Genoa led her to it and gestured for her to look. Carved into the stone were symbols she recognized, a peace pipe, a compass, and words in English. Samuel Barrick and Nasha, teachers of peace. Their legacy continues. We honor them too, Takoda said softly. They started this bridge between our peoples. They died before they could finish building it. But you carried their work forward. This memorial honors all who fought for peace, whether with weapons or with truth. Crista placed her hand on the stone, feeling the carved symbols under her fingers. She thought about her father riding through a storm to warn people, arriving too late. She thought about Nasha staying behind so others could escape. She thought about how their choices made decades ago had rippled forward to this moment. Thank you, she whispered, for remembering them, for honoring what they tried to do. They stood together in the high mountain silence, the wind carrying the scent of pine and snow and new growth. Below them, the canyon spread out peacefully, no longer a battlefield but simply land, beautiful, enduring, belonging to no one and everyone. As they prepared to ride back, Genoa spoke one more time, and Takoda's translation carried the weight of promise. He says, the fight for justice never ends. There will always be people who choose greed over honor, lies over truth. But there will also always be people like you, like your father, like Nasha, people who choose courage, who build bridges, who speak truth even when it costs everything. He says as long as such people exist, hope exists. Crista looked at the memorial, at the cairns marking sacrifice and courage, at the symbols honoring her father and Nasha. She thought about Casa growing up in a world slightly better than the one she'd been born into, about the bridges being built one conversation at a time, about the long work of justice that would continue long after she was gone. Tell him, she said, that I'll keep building bridges as long as I have strength. Tell him that's my promise and my purpose. The translation was made, and Genoa nodded. Then they rode back down the mountain together, Apache, settler, family, toward the pueblo where dinner would be waiting and children would be playing and life would continue in all its difficult, beautiful complexity. Crista touched the compass in her pocket, felt Nasha's band on her wrist, and smiled. Truth over fear, always. That was the lesson her father had taught. The legacy Nasha had left, the promise she would keep, and it was enough.